doorstep, then all they need to do is to see the numbers we've had turning up to our environmental hub this week. And we will be there on every doorstep making the case for change, because it is Labour and climate change that needs to be addressed. Okay, colleagues, what we're going to do, I did have a series of pre-prepared notes for this session, but then, as is always the case, the big cheeses make some announcements and those notes sort of go a little bit out the window. So I'm actually going to roll straight into the panel, because I actually think you're probably going to want to hear from Ed Miliband, very much about some of the announcements made today, and particularly on how the Green Prosperity Plan and the investment can make a difference to our energy system and put the UK at the top of being the UK being an energy superpower. I'm then going to invite business and one of the organisations that's heavily involved in investing in renewables in the UK, and who's been forefront of work in Wales in terms of the transition there. I'm then going to take over to Scotland and invite SERA Boyack to actually come in and reflect on the experience of Scotland. And then last but not least, I'm going to invite a colleague of mine, Martin Freer, who's very much been pushing for energy system Birmingham Energy Institute, the Energy Research Accelerator, but importantly has been running a commission about the role of the public sector in potentially us becoming an energy superpower. For any of those who are interested from a public sector perspective, hopefully Martin will have some news. But maybe Ed's already solved it all. Who knows? Over to you, Ed.
Thank you so much, and obviously what a pleasure it is to be here. Say people are saying 50 years. SERA is a fantastic organisation. SERA is younger than me. I know you'll find that hard to believe. A bit more disbelief, please. This is my, believe it or not, this is my 14th year of Labour Party. And it's great to be here, and I think there is a mood of change in the air, and that's a great thing. I also want to thank my for their incredible willingness to be partners with us. Appreciated, incredibly thanks for that. So I wanted to talk about our policy agenda. I wanted to talk a little bit about the partnership, and this partnership needed to be with, and then I want to say a little bit about ambition. Look, just the first thing to say is we're great at the Labour Party in sort of boasting about our achievements, but our agenda, we tend to sort of always talk about what our agenda isn't, and sort of say, oh well, we need more of this or more of that. Just really important to say, we have devised an agenda with Labour Party members through our National Policy Forum process, which is about cutting bills for people, 2030 clean power. That will mean £400 off every family's bill in the country. Why? Because we know that renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels, significantly cheaper than fossil fuels, and we will double onshore wind, we will treble solar power, and we will quadruple offshore wind as part of that. And so just sort of have in your mind that we have an agenda which is addressing, not just in a sticking plaster way, as Cllr would say, but in a long-term way, by the end of the first term of the Labour government, a massive issue for people, which is what is happening to bills. Alongside that, we have our energy efficiency commitment, which is to finally have a home plan in this country and insulate 19 million homes. It is absolutely doable. We were doing something like this rate when Labour left office. It's absolutely hopeless under the Tories ever since David Cameron said cut the green crap. You may remember that. It's that crap government rather than cutting the green crap. We can absolutely do this. Thirdly, we're going to have cheap energy. and investing in things like floating wind in the future. Why is it become a public energy generator? If you look around the world, you'll see those countries that are succeeding in not just getting the power, but getting the jobs, have that domestic national champion. Think about Ørsted, Denmark, Vattenfall, EDF, in France, all of them are public ownership. And some people will tell you we don't have public ownership of our energy assets in Britain. We absolutely do. It's state-owned public ownership from abroad. Honestly, this is absolutely the case. We just don't have a British version. We are going to with GB Energy, and then fourthly, our National Wealth Fund, which is, I think it's really important to this. I'm going to talk about this a bit in my speech tomorrow. This is about making sure not just we generate the jobs, but that we generate the jobs in the places that too often have not benefited from prosperity. And it's also one little interesting example. 80% of the energy jobs under Biden have been in areas which are below median income. And why is that? Is that just coincidence? Is that because the market decided to put that investment there? No, they structured the tax incentives so that that's where the jobs have gone. And we've got something called British say that if you invest in our coastal communities and not oil and gas communities, then you will get additional help as a company, because we want those jobs created in Britain, and we want those jobs to, this is genuinely a strategy for tackling regional and local inequality, not just a slogan like the Tories will have. So put those four things together: lower bills, making sure that we insulate we about it, GB Energy and the National Wealth Fund. This adds up to the agenda. And that's the same thing about last week. I'm not too good in my mind. I used to let myself anyway, he's not just anti-planet, he's anti-prosperity, he's anti-security, he's anti-the future, he's anti-young people. You illuminate this town with your street lights. They want to have a fight, but really stand up. Yeah, you took this boy and turned him around. Yeah, you made giving us energy security. I say bring on the fight. Bring on the fight. Because with the best will in the world, the billions of public investments are about levering in the tens of billions, hundreds of billions of private investments. It's really about very clear example. Why haven't we got the offshore jobs in Britain, the offshore wind jobs that were promised by the Tories, by the SNP? In part because we haven't invested in something very simple, which is our ports, right? If we don't have the ports that can actually accommodate these huge turbines, you're not going to have the jobs in this country. We are going to have the biggest port investment, 1.8 billion from the National Wealth Fund. We're going to have the biggest port investment in 40 years in Britain. It's another one of those things that's our policy, but people don't know about. It's incredibly important. And this takes me to this wider point, which is, this for us is about the public investment and the sense of mission that Cllr talks about. But it's also about unleashing the private investment that we need. And that's also about breaking down the huge barriers, the grid, which we'll be talking about tomorrow, planning barriers, skills and supply chain barriers. Now, I just want to say in this question of partnership, that is a government business partnership, but it's also got to be a partnership with every community in this country. And this is really important to take people with us on this journey. If there's clean, as Rachel was saying in the papers today, if there's clean energy infrastructure in the area, there should be community benefit. No ifs, no buts. Local communities should benefit from hosting that infrastructure. But more than that, I was lucky enough to go 2 weeks ago to something called the Lawrence. Does everyone know about Lawrence Western? Right, so Lawrence Western. More people need to know about Lawrence Western. The tallest onshore wind turbine in Britain, owned not by a company, but by a community in Lawrence Western in Bristol. This is you may have heard the term community wealth building. This is green community wealth building. So it's saying we're going to own the turbine here, and the proceeds of that, the proceeds from that are going to come to our community. And Lawrence Weston reckon they may be getting up to £1 million a year when they've got a loan for this, and they're going to when the loan is paid off, they're going to get £1 million a year, which they get to decide how they spend in their community. Now, Lawrence Weston have done that with zero help from government. It took them 7 years. It started with 2 people in the pub, but anyway, I won't tell you the whole story. But okay, so here's the thing. Another thing you may not know about: GB Energy is going to have thousands of Lawrence Westons across Britain, because we, through a combination of grants and loans, are going to work with local communities to reproduce that model, that idea, working with local authorities, working with local communities to say, look, if you want to have renewable power in your area, let's do it. Let's use it as an instrument to tackle poverty. I mean, like, one way of putting this is, why should only wealthy people have solar panels on their roofs? Why shouldn't we get poorer communities to have solar panels on their roofs too? So there is huge opportunity for us, for this to be a mission, which is, yes, about government, yes, about business, but should also be about every community in the country. Last thing I just want to end on is this. You know, Keir has talked about these 5 missions that he has, and, you know, inevitably journalists are cynical and all of that. There's something incredibly important here. If ever something was a mission for the country, it is tackling the biggest long-term issue we face, which is the climate crisis. And this is going to be the mission. This is going to be the heart of the mission of the next Labour government. And there'll be lots of people who tell you Labour's 2030 plan, oh, it's not going to, you know, you can't do it, you know, it's going to be too difficult. What about the grid? What about planning? What about all of this? I think there's a really important thing here, which is ambition equal to the scale of the emergency we face. When we had COVID, people told the COVID task force, the vaccine task force, you'll never develop a vaccine in 12 to 18 months, and they did. When the energy crisis hit Germany, because of Putin's invasion of Ukraine, people said you'll never build an LNG terminal in 2 years, and they built it in 9 months. If you have focus, if you have the authority of the Prime Minister and the Chancellor behind this, and we will if we are in government, we can do much, much more than people expect. And so I hope we have developed an exciting mission, a mission that can mobilize the whole country, that is about jobs and security and bills, and is about the climate leadership that Britain needs. And then when we are in the international negotiations on climate, we won't have to say, well, we're embarrassing Britain that is actually saying one thing to you and doing another at home, which is what happens under the Tories. We will be able to say, actually, with the power of our example, we are showing what is possible. We can tackle the climate crisis. We can make people better off. And that's what we're going to do. Thank you very much.
Okay, what a difference a party makes, eh? Last week we heard from Rishi, this week we heard from Ed. Okay, moving very much on and picking up, really, I think, Ed, on one of your themes about the importance of partnership with business, but equally within that, securing the return for climate and community. And I'm really pleased that you've referenced the transition and the work that RWE has been doing, because I know some colleagues have questioned SERA choosing to actually partner with RWE on this event. Our view is that if you're going to actually support a fair transition and a just transition, you have to actually talk to those who are investing in it. So I'm really pleased to give the floor to Tom, UK Chair of RWE.
Yeah, thank you. I'd like to address that point straight away, actually, because, you know, it is. I've worked for RWE for 20 years, and it's most proud to have RWE's name on an environmental event, because we're a company in transition, and you need companies like us to transition, right? This is how we're actually going to get to net zero. is by big companies like us who have had high CO2 emissions previously to actually get rid of them, because we've got the capital to do so. And I will address it that our targets, our company targets, are fully in line with the Paris Agreement to get to net zero by 2040 across Scope 1, Scope 2 and Scope 3, and they've been independently scientifically tested. So we are on a track to indeed help the Labour Party get to its energy mission, and it's a real privilege to be here. And thank you, SERA. And I would also thank Ed and his team, because Ed mentioned it. Ed and his team met myself and my group CEO a few months ago, and we had a very strong, you can imagine, a strong and robust partnership conversation where, Ed was tackling us on, why are some of our offshore wind farms owned by German municipalities and not by the British? And we sent him a number of papers to, help work out how we can do this partnership working together. So we're fully committed to help Labour achieve its energy mission. And before I just go into a bit more detail about what RWE does, we are party neutral as a company, as you can imagine, but I prefer Ed's messages than the ones I heard last week. Right. And it's really, really important. And it doesn't sound like stuff, but having the firm commitment, right? The backtracking that we saw last week on various environmental policies, which weren't directly related to the power sector, actually. They were like EVs and heat pumps and stuff. But straight away, my boss, who's the group CEO of a DAX 30 company, rings me up and says, do I need to think about my development costs in the UK? So it's the message and the commitment, that high level that people want to get there, want to get to net zero, that means investors keep on thinking they want to spend development on all these big infrastructure projects that bring it forward. So the most important thing is everybody stays on track, stays the course, and says we're going to get there. So that's maybe a bit on that. I'll say a little bit about RWE because not everybody knows us, but despite the introduction, we are the UK's largest power generator, and therefore you need us to change, right? If we change, the country changes. And we're also probably one of the biggest investor in renewables. So we've got plans to invest up to 15 billion in the next 8 years in green technologies. So, probably needs 100 billion spending. So we're about 15% of it. So you want us to do that investment. So we build these wind farms, we build the solar farmers. We're one of the biggest offshore developers, one of the biggest solar developers, one of the big onshore developers. But we're also, just to put the elephant in the room, we're one of the big gas-fired power generators, right? But we've also got plans at every single power plant about how we may want to decarbonise, even through carbon capture or hydrogen. But you don't want us to turn them off now. Otherwise, these lights will go off, right? So it's a transition.
They're pretty low as it is.
Yes, but well, I'm sorry. I don't think I'm responsible, but you never know. So we're a company in transition, and we're not scared to come to these events, to sponsor these events, because we know we need to change, and we know we'll sometimes get a rough ride, but we're committed to do this, and we need people to help us to support it. And we won't get everything right, but we'll try our best. And we've got this clear direction of travel. Obviously, my notes by my team were done before Ed's clarity. I'd like to comment some specific ones. So as an energy industry, we welcome the ambition. A Labour target of 2030 is ambitious. It's a stretch target, right? But I think, as I'd say, with that government commitment, we wouldn't have gone to the moon, right? So we have to try, right, and put everything behind it. And I think that is great. And we also welcome working in partnership with government. It's not an us and them. We actually need a lot of changes from government to get this stuff delivered. We need some changes to planning rules. Yeah, we need the support of local communities. We need port infrastructure is one that we're always going on about. We want to deploy floating wind, but there's just not enough port with the right lifting capacity. And the problem is we can give them one project, but that doesn't get the investment in the port. So you do need government support to do that. And that will crowd in other investment. And community support, we're fully behind this. So RWE to date, last 10 years, £33 million in community support in the UK. Given our projects are already committed to give another 70, so already we're 100 million in on community support. So we're big believers in those people who are hosting infrastructure or helping infrastructure. They should get some benefit from it, and we're a big believer in that. So we welcome all these initiatives. There's nothing that Labour Party is saying that we are worried about. We just want to make sure it's a partnership. I will just call out, it's not that easy, right? So I'm going to talk about some challenges so we're all clear, right? It is a challenging investment environment. It has not been helped by the current government, and I'm trying to be political, but it has not been, because we're trying to get capital. This capital is global, and you have to pull. You've got to give that clear direction that people want to invest. So we've got that. We've got overhanging policy and regulation. The government has been thinking about energy market change for like 3 years. And as investors, we don't know what's going to happen. So we need that policy certainty. We do have a challenging political environment. It doesn't help that my boss is ringing me up going, well, it's issue because I'm currently spending as a company about 300 million of development money at risk to try and develop all these infrastructure projects that I have in the UK. And every time I don't believe it's not going to come off them. We need that. And lots of issues,
If you're building new renewables, whether you're a community cooperative or you're a big company, you will have to wait in a queue for years. That cannot be right. There are jobs we're missing out on, people who would be able to construct that grid, get local community benefits for our constituents, and make sure that people's bills go down. That is a real prospect with the Labour government, and we need to do that. And we need to think about infrastructure, storage infrastructure, using the investment in our hydropower set up by the 1945 Labour government. When the wind turbines are going, they're currently turned off if it's too windy. We should be pumping that electricity into the network so that we use hydropower, so that we use battery storage, so that we actually have a grid system that works for the country. And the companies I've spoken to are really excited, but they have real problems with two governments who are not being consistent. They need supply chains, they need local jobs, they need people with skills and knowledge and training. Now, we've got a lot of people who work offshore in the North Sea, some of whom are involved in that transition you've heard about already. They're using their skills, they're using their experience, but we need a skills passport to make it easier for working people to get that just transition, decent jobs, using their experience, jobs not just now, but for the future. So it's really exciting. And my colleague Daniel Johnson is working on STEM, working on energy and skills, because in Scotland, our universities and colleges are experiencing a £40 million cut in their budgets this year from the SNP government. So we need to do better. We need the ambition as Labour. We need to do the heavy lifting. And I'm really excited that Ed and his team are doing that and they're talking about it with us. So let's get going, because this is a huge opportunity for us. And the point Ed made about joined up approach, if you think about the climate crisis and the cost of living crisis, we have some of the most damp and inefficient houses in the whole of Europe. And in Scotland, the idea that we could retrofit 1.4 million houses. Think about the jobs that would create in our local communities, the supply chains, the work with businesses, the work with housing associations and our councils, huge opportunities. Community energy projects. Took Edinburgh Council a decade to get our solar cooperative off the ground. We need to share best practice. We need to get going, because climate change is a now issue. You just need to look about the summer this weekend. And I had to come down here by car, because would you believe all of our trains were cancelled from Edinburgh to England yesterday because we had a month's rain in 24 hours. So climate change is a disaster from our developing countries. We need to step up to the mark. We need to deliver in the UK. And our climate targets will not just be ambitious, but deliverable. And that's the excitement. So I want everyone in this room to go out of here feeling excited and doubly committed to get out and campaign for a Labour government, because we would make the change that our constituents need, reducing their bills, reducing our climate emissions, and creating a world that will be for the future, that will tackle the climate and the cost of living crisis. What could be more important for us as a future Labour government? Thank you.
Okay, Martin. So, you feeling excited?
Well, so really excited, actually. I think the passion that we've heard here already, the level of ambition, level of enthusiasm is fantastic. It's really hard to disagree with anything that anybody has said right now. But I guess my job is to wrestle with detail and make sure that things that people are saying and people are planning add up to an energy system that works in the future. And if one thinks, so we've done a lot of good stuff, if one thinks around what's happened in terms of decarbonisation of electricity, a lot of progress, 40% renewables now on the grid, that's brilliant. Coal pretty much off the grid, fantastic. But remember, electricity is about a sixth of our energy consumption. Fuels for transport is about a third, and heating, industrial heating, domestic heating is about a half. So there is a heck of a lot of way to go in terms of wrestling with the solution. And if we just think through what the solution might be for decarbonisation of heating, we don't yet have a complete answer. Part of it will be,
yes, heat pumps. But if we look at how well we have done around heat pumps, if you rank European states, European nations, 21 nations, and look at number of heat pumps that have been installed per 1,000 people, UK is bottom. So our strategy, our policy, our commitment is not quite there yet to deliver against that 50% energy challenge that we have. If one thinks about a grid which is heavy in terms of renewables, how do you manage that intermittency? Where is our strategy? Where is our policy around energy storage? That doesn't yet exist. If we think about decarbonisation of industry, where is the carbon capture and storage network that we are going to need to distribute and then finally sequester that CO2? There is a huge amount that needs to be done in terms of joining up a coherent, comprehensive energy strategy. And as Lisa said, we've done a bit of work to think about if there is a public body in this space, what should it focus on? Should it focus on privatizing the energy supply companies? We have 5 big energy supply companies. They are at the sharp end of things. But if you think about it for a moment, they exist on paper-thin margins. And in fact, that was tested to breaking point with about 30 energy companies going bust in recent times. So it's probably not the end to focus on. Do you renationalize the complete energy system? Is that the right thing to do? If you think about the networks and all of the generation, do you renationalize that? That would be a colossal amount of money. Some estimate, somewhere around 200 billion. Is that just buying that back into public ownership? Is that a useful thing to do? Or could you spend 200 billion on your energy system in the future? And if one looks at costs around the development of the grid, etc., cost of strategic storage, there is a much better case, I think, in terms of deploying that capital. If you look at, and Ed is right, so if you look at some of the renewable companies that we have in this country, well, not just renewable companies, so RWE falls into this category as well. A lot of them are overseas owned. Where is the indigenous energy industry that we have in the UK? And indeed, some of these companies from Scandinavia are making good profits. So, for example, Statkraft made 1.3 billion, and that was not returned into the UK. That was returned back into Scandinavia. But if you were to take that 1.3 billion and distribute it across every household in the UK, how much does that come to? It's about £50. So it doesn't make a huge amount of difference in terms of our energy bills. And you can kind of go through all of the ways that a public energy company could intervene in the energy system. And I will be quick here, but our conclusions are that you need to focus on 3 principles. The first is that any reform needs to be decisive but minimal, in the sense that we don't have a lot of time to reinvent the system. So complete change to the system is not going to be practical. Any new organization needs to be tightly focused and not have a huge portfolio of activities it's delivering, because that is impractical. You need to get a business up and running on a very short time scale. And state-owned bodies should concentrate on the parts of the energy problem that the private sector cannot solve. So our conclusions, where a vehicle like GB Energy could have most impact, and many of these overlap, I think, with what you've been saying, Ed. Local energy is a really big opportunity. So we have an energy system which is going to be transformed in the future. We're going to have national generation balanced with local generation. there is a massive opportunity for catalyzing what is happening at the local end of the scheme or the local end of the system. The other big opportunity is around energy storage. At the moment, we don't have a market, a working market for energy storage. And this is an area which, if the market isn't working, that a public body could step in and drive that market. And then the other area is around strategic infrastructure. So I mentioned carbon capture and storage. We need potentially a CCS pipeline, which will need to be constructed. We will need strategic storage potentially associated with hydrogen. And this mirrors the strategic storage that we used to have in terms of gas, the rough gas storage system. And deep geothermal could be another area where GB Energy could play a significant role. But, and this is my last word, my quick last word, but actually the real challenge that we have in the energy system, going back to what I said at the beginning, is coordination and being able to have an oversight and a high priority around delivery. And in fact, what we need is a national delivery body. And this national delivery body needs to have high priority and potentially equal status with Treasury. And it needs, I think, the Labour Party actually not to just have lots of exciting ideas about how the energy system could function in the future, but actually set this as the highest priority, something equivalent to the wartime footing that we need to recognise that we need in order to drive the energy change on the timescales that are required.
Okay, colleagues, so we have a massive challenge. We have the ambition, the collective ambition to meet it. And what we need to look for and indeed want is an institutional architecture that actually helps us drive it for the benefit of UK. So, colleagues, the power is with you. The floor is with you. Oh, my life. Okay. Can I take Ajay first, please?
Hello, can you hear me? Thank you, paneling. Good evening, colleagues. My name is Ajay Lawalia, and I'm the Head of Supply Chain at Renewable UK and a SERA exec member. So the question of the panel was, how can Labour make the UK a clean, green superpower? Now, I might be slightly biased, but I'd like to contribute to the discussion the topic of supply chain that's already been touched upon. With the CCC and National Grid Future Energy scenarios indicating that offshore wind will become the backbone of the UK's energy system, a report that my organisation, Renewable UK Offshore Wind Industry Council and OWGP has published this week indicates that 92 billion of gross value add, that's GVA, can be added to the UK economy by 2040. The report also indicates how support for the offshore industry could also be placed around things like electrical systems and cables that could also contribute to grid reinforcement programs as well. This vision sees things like green steel being manufactured in Port Talbot, in Scunthorpe. It sees low carbon concrete being produced in Scotland. And I just wondered if the panel could speak to that as well. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to take 3 contributions from the floor. Gentleman there, lady there. Sorry, Alice, did you have a question as well? I'll come back to you next. Okay.
So Dominic Weeks, Zeravia. We're developing hydrogen electric engines for aircraft. So we're a hard to abate sector. What I was curious, hydrogen came up towards the very end. And I was just thinking, when we look at all the changes in the agenda set out by Ed with the Potential Energy Independence Act, what will be the impact on the UK's hydrogen strategy?
Okay, and the colleague there. Thank you.
Thanks. I'm Miranda Barker. I'm the Chief Executive of East Lancashire Chamber of Commerce. And we are the area predicted to have the highest number of low carbon tech jobs. And even just if you look in one area of tech, for instance, batteries, we are producing the battery manufacturing machines that are going to Dyson, China, Norway, the States. We're doing new sodium solid state batteries. We're doing space batteries for the Dark Side of the Moon mission in 2029. And the government's flip-flopping in terms of investment and focus on EV battery and industry has really shaken loose some of that private sector investment, and it's a tragedy. We really have a huge economic opportunity, but we've got to focus on taking it all the way through to commercialization and not repeat the same exercise and not do what happened with semiconductors, where the government pledged £1 billion and then said, oh, but we won't do the manufacturing. We need commitment that it goes all the way through to commercialization, to job creation, the benefit for the UK economy, and the technology the world needs.
What's the can I just ask you the question? What's the most?
Will you focus on achieving all the way through to commercialization for the UK to capitalize on that economically and employment wise?
And what's the biggest thing that would make a difference to that?
Commitment to fix the funding schemes. We don't need to compete with the IRA. We don't need to compete with the Inflation Reduction Act. We just need a little bit of money that is focused around turning business all the way through to that commercialization, and you can put returns on it. You can get returns of £1 to £5 out for every pound put in within literally 2 or 3 years, and you can put as many outputs as you want on that. But we need to focus on creating the jobs and the manufacturing in the UK market, not let it run away elsewhere.
Okay, Ed.
Thank you for the questions. I'll try and be as brief as I can. Ajay, thank you for your question. Thank you also to Renewable UK for having a cappuccino with my face on it, which you can get at the Renewable UK store, in case you wondered. If that's a horrible thought, I apologize. Look, you're right about this, but things have got to change if this is going to happen. Because the truth is that we are the second largest generator of offshore wind in the world, but we are punching below our weight when it comes to the jobs. And that is partly about things like the ports that I talked about, and it's the absence of an industrial strategy by government, and it's not thinking about things like the CFD auctions on the basis of how do you have a proper industrial strategy. So I think sort of top to bottom, there needs to be a kind of change of mindset in relation to this, but I completely concur with what you say about the opportunity. Dominic, thank you for your question, and forgive me for not having said more about hydrogen, because clearly there are many sectors where hydrogen is going to play an incredibly important role. I think that one of the things that worries me about this is the slowness of government to develop the proper framework for hydrogen support. When you look at a country like Germany and the funding that there is in relation to hydrogen, when you think about some great British companies that are talking about building potential factories here around electrolyzers, they say, well, look, we can get the support in other countries, we just can't get the support here. So absolutely, we see hydrogen as a key part of the mix, green hydrogen in particular, and it is about developing the proper mechanisms to give that support and to get on with it, and we're very committed to that. And then the question about batteries is really well taken, and look, I think there is something really important here, and it also applies to hydrogen, which is if you have a government that sort of basically thinks the answer is a market system without proper government support, and only does, and I think it's interesting this, think about the government's interventions that we've seen. There's interventions at scale. So Port Talbot was an intervention at scale. The JLR Gigafactory was an intervention at scale, but it is totally ad hoc, and it is not a systemic approach. And if you have that, we are going to lose the global race. And it's in a way, when we talk about the National Wealth Fund, when I think about something like the UK Investment Bank, which we hope that the National Wealth Fund will build on, it's about saying, look, there is a partnership role here, and there's a role for government in doing things which will de-risk this project for the private sector, lever in. It's not about the public investment on its own, but it's about levering in, and Rachel's going to talk about this in her speech tomorrow, levering in private investment to make to make leadership possible. And it seems to me that's what the Inflation Reduction Act is doing. It's not, you know, and to listen to government ministers on this, you would sort of think that you know, somehow, well, A, that there wasn't 5 trillion of potential investment to go around globally, 5 trillion a year, according to the IEA. But secondly, that, oh, we shouldn't be doing this. You know, that this is sort of somehow kind of a kind of anti-private sector thing to be doing. It isn't. It's about facilitating the private sector to invest itself and for your country to be in the global race. And so, you know, really interested by what you said about batteries.
Thanks for that, Ed. Susan?
Yeah, really, really good questions. I mentioned supply chains in my speech, and it's really frustrating that we have now got so many on and offshore renewables operating in Scotland, and they're not made in Scotland. They're not made in the rest of the UK either. We import them. And because we've been doing this for over 20 years now, it is a huge missed manufacturing opportunity. And we had Machrihanish, we've had Bifab, we've had actual sites where there were where it was actually working and it didn't get the government support. So it's really frustrating, that lack of support for industry, for private sector, and for that partnership that Ed talked about. And I think it comes back to the clarity, the certainty, conditionality. So ScotWind, a huge missed opportunity. It's the next generation of offshore wind, but there was more investment could have come from that and better conditionality about making that kit in Scotland and in the UK. Huge opportunities. The second question about green hydrogen, actually raised this in Parliament just last week, because you've got opportunities in the northeast of Scotland, you've got opportunities at Grangemouth, but they need that support now. It needs to be a joined up discussion between government and business. And you've got huge sites where we could make the most of that and think about how hydrogen is used in the future. Some of it is early doors discussion, but it's definitely on the agenda. And the third point about geography, about actually making sure that this works. It's one of the things that I found really exciting when I actually read the Green Prosperity Plan, because it's geographic. It doesn't just say, yes, in the UK, we're going to have all these targets. It actually takes you through different parts of the UK, the northeast of England, Wales, Scotland, and it says, here's what we could do in this part of the country. And it's not that each part of the country does everything, but as the UK, we are nowhere near delivering the opportunities, and we should be a world leader, not playing catch up. And that's the big missed opportunity we've had for over the last decade. And that's why the Green Prosperity Plan, the Local Power Plan, actually getting that investment going, that partnership, working with businesses, working with local authorities, and critically working with communities. When we get big new investment in infrastructure, you've got a community benefit baked in from day one. And that's totally deliverable. It works. We just need to start doing it. And having the vision and the detail and the ambition, doing all that heavy lifting. And that's the bit I'm confident about. We're having those discussions.
Okay, absolutely. What is distinct and different about place, and the depth and breadth of that difference is key. Okay, Martin, green hydrogen supply and geography.
Yep. Okay. Well, I'll touch on some of that. So I think one needs to look at what has worked. So if one looked at what happened in the wind sector, which is, I think everybody would agree, is a real success story. Why did that work? It was because there was a long-term plan around bringing renewables onto the grid. There was a market mechanism, contracts for difference, which allowed those who invest to invest with confidence over a long-term period, and there was a sector deal. And once you've got that clarity of thought, then the markets can move very quickly to accommodate. And I think that's what's needed across other parts of the energy system. So, for example, in hydrogen, what are we going to use hydrogen for? Are we going to use hydrogen for decarbonising the heating in our homes? Are we going to use hydrogen for transport and even hydrogen for flight? Are we going to use hydrogen for decarbonisation of industry? As long as we make some decisions around that and we have the right market mechanisms, people will invest, companies will invest, and we will move in the right direction. And then if one looks around heating, it's the same problem. We still have that ambiguity, hydrogen for heat, district heating systems, or is it a heat pump solution? And without clarity, local authorities aren't going to know what to do. We see district heating companies sitting back because they don't see that there is that policy environment, that clarity to invest. So going back to the delivery body, a delivery body has a key role to play in setting that long-term strategy, matching it with an industrial strategy, and matching it with a plan to deliver. And you need to deliver, you think about skills, so we've heard about skills, you need to line up training programs so you have people trained at the right point so that they can deliver. You've not got a strategy and then suddenly you've got 5 years to train people so that they can deliver that strategy. You're also thinking about supply chains and aligning supply chains. And nuclear power was a good example on that. When we signed the deal on Hinkley Point C, 60% of the supply chain for that had to point back into the UK. That was integrated into the deal. You can line these things up, but it needs people who sit at the center of the decision-making process, thinking about all parts of the system.
Thank you very much for that, Martin. Very much along, again, these lines that we need pathways, very clear pathways where we can go in the right direction. Tom?
It's difficult going at the end. I mean, I'm going to be an advertising agent for the exhibition space where you can really understand this in detail. So I would go to the hydrogen zone. You'll hear about not just RWE's projects in hydrogen, aviation, JCB. You'll see lots of the opportunities in the supply chain and employment in hydrogen. I would go to the carbon capture zone where you'll see all the projects with RWE and our partners about how we're going to capture carbon and the opportunities in the pipelines that you talked about, the requirement, but also CO2 shipping. I'd also go and visit AJ at the renewable stall. I think they've got a little thing on your filter where you can get your picture on your coffee, so you look like Tom Cruise, hopefully. But go out there. Those guys will tell you, read that report, go to the hydrogen. And I think when I talk about supply chain, we can talk about lots and lots of different things in detail. But ultimately, jobs come when you build something, right? And it's really simple. So even if you did nothing today and you didn't have a disastrous offshore wind auction like we're having in this current government, if you build nothing, you get 0 jobs, right? That's it. That's easy, right? The offshore wind industry is already committing to 50 to 60% of local content today. Our Sophia project, £3 billion, 50% local content. That's 1.5 billion. My 15 billion investment, 50% content, that's 7.5 billion just off RWE. You don't have to do anything. You just need to build it. And you've got these hydrogen people, you've got the carbon capture people, the offshore people, the onshore people, all wanting to build stuff. And so there's loads of jobs available. And please, read AJ's report. It's a planted question, I think, AJ, that you want people to go and speak to you. Is at the renewable stand and you get a coffee. All right?
What's a bit of a plant? Okay, colleagues, I will take 3 more short questions for some quick fire roundup answers. Okay. Ken, Alice, woman there, younger woman in the red, blouse in the middle, yeah. And
sorry, I have the microphone.
And I'm now going to feel really difficult. Can you choose, mate? That's what being a co-chair is all about. Guy in the corner. Right. Okay. So the woman. Who's first then? Yep.
Oh, sorry, I've got the mic already.
Yep, fantastic.
I didn't know whether I was the right woman, but I took the mic.
You've got the mic. Take it. Go for it, Bob.
So I'm Georgina. I'm from Rolls-Royce SMR, which is a nuclear plant, but it is going to be up to 80% UK content, what we were just talking about. Firstly, point 1, the renewable UK coffee is actually fantastic. I sent it to so many friends. Number 2, don't worry, I'm not going to ask you about nuclear. Labour has made it clear that planning streamlining is really important to bring new energy infrastructure online. I want to know how they plan or how they should plan to marry that with maintaining environmental protections, because at the moment they're not traditionally natural partners, but obviously that needs to change.
Thank you. Colleague in the middle, thank you. Yeah.
Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you.
Natalie from Oxfam. And Ed, I had a question for you because the issue of fairness came out really strongly in your contribution today. And And also, when we talk about being a global superpower, I think it's also really important to talk about our international responsibilities. So just wondering what a Labour government would do to better support lower income countries to decarbonise, adapt and address loss and damage. Thank you.
Shall I go?
Yeah.
Yeah, Chris Hewitt from Solar Energy UK. Yes, we're the sister body of Renewable Energy UK. We represent the solar industry in the UK. My question is around the decentralized nature of energy generation and storage, I guess. So this year, we think there's going to be 2 billion worth of investment, 2 billion in small scale rooftop solar. That's mostly residential, some small businesses, but that's significant. It's probably more solar investment than more solar installations we would have seen at any time, including the highest rates of the feed-in tariff. We also know that at least 50% of those are going to have a battery with them. So there's a real opportunity to decentralize that electricity storage across the country. So as well as talking about the big stuff, as the pumped hydro, the hydrogen projects, I think there's a real opportunity in residential batteries. And we know companies that want to build those in the UK as well.
Fantastic. Okay, as somebody who's gone and put PV on their roofs and got batteries in their cellars, I can see what you mean. Okay, I'm going to go in reverse order this time, Tom, so you don't have to go last, love.
Thank you.
I'll start with you.
Okay, so there's small-scale solar, small-scale renewables. Yeah, we need to encourage it. It's absolutely ridiculous. We're building modern houses new houses without solar on the roof, and heat pumps. You know, I'm large-scale, right? But we need to do so much to get to net zero. We need all the small stuff and all the big stuff. So it's not a competition. And you know, I'm currently restoring a house, and getting solar on my roof is a nightmare because it's listed. So we need to have some more policy. But all new houses, it's absolutely terrible. So we need to get to zero houses in the new stock. So I fully believe we need all the small stuff. Coordinating it is quite complicated. So we need more smart. We need to get the smart meters sorted out. We need to get the smart dispatch so that people get the fair price for it, and they don't get not enough tariff for that small scale stuff. So we're a big supporter of small scale. We don't do it ourselves, but we think it's needed. On the environmental stuff, first of all, well done with the SMR. We wish you all the luck. I did speak to Alan at Rolls-Royce, and we think it'd be great if you can get to the LCEs you want, so we can talk about nuclear one. On the environmental stuff, look, it's a challenge on any big infrastructure project. You can't do something without some environmental damage, right? It's a sorry fact. You know, we're all trying to get to net zero, but if I put a wire anywhere on the ocean or I do a wind farm, we're going to have some biodiversity impact, right? So what we do as a company is we do net biodiversity gain. So we do at least 120% net biodiversity gain. On our solar farms now, we're getting to over 200% net biodiversity gain when we put them in the ground. So we do local biodiversity stuff to try and make sure that. But we also need some, and we're interested in his comments, some strategic environmental compensation. So net, we need to sort out the environment and net zero, but we can't always do it on each individual project. But we need to make sure that, you know, if we're disturbing kittiwakes, then we do a kittiwake compensation scheme. If we're doing fish, we do fish compensation scheme. So we need to think a bit more strategic, because we can't, unfortunately, we can't build big stuff and not have a small impact on those sites. That is just unfortunate where we are. I'm not going to answer the question on Oxfam because I think it was mainly for Ed.
Martin, over to you.
Which one do you want me to take,
You
Lisa?
can take whichever one you fancy. As a nuclear physicist, you might want to answer about nuclear. I don't know.
Well, okay, so hey, the cat is out of the bag. So I'm a nuclear physicist. Naturally, I would embrace with a certain level of optimism the UK strategy around nuclear, so that you will know that the UK has, and this is cross-party, this is not an individual party position. The UK is investing in large-scale nuclear reactors. Hinkley Point C, almost certainly Sizewell C will happen. And then there's the SMR program. The UK is also putting in funding into advanced modular reactors and also fusion power plant. We're building our own fusion power plant. So good ambition. And actually this, to make it work, so nuclear can do baseload, of course. It does that extraordinarily well. And we're going to need quite a lot of baseload in the future. But technologies such as SMR and Rolls-Royce is one vendor, but other vendors do exist. And it's how we get the most out of this technology. How do we take the heat that these reactors generate and make sure that that heat is put into industrial processes? How do we build large-scale hydrogen production around these plants? It's time to think about how we do nuclear differently as part of this forward thinking of the energy system into the future. I could answer others, but I'll stop there.
Brilliant. Thank you for that. What would you like to go for?
Well, I was just thinking of the three questions. First question from Georgina about environmental standards is absolutely critical, but we have now had over 20 years of experience in Scotland, and talking to colleagues in different environmental organisations and with renewables companies, we should have the evidence of the impact of offshore wind in terms of bird life particularly, but also when you've got the turbines installed on the seabed, what is the impact on different types of animal and biodiversity? It needs to be peer reviewed so you've got standards that can be matched. And mitigation is something that I think is really important, whether it's onshore wind or offshore wind. We know how it impacts now. We just need to make sure that we do that biodiversity angle to the projects as well. I was speaking to somebody who does tidal energy, and their challenge is it takes 7 years in Scotland to get planning approval. It takes 2 in Canada. So we need to get the balance right so that we don't fall back but still do the environment protection. Natalie's question for Oxfam, loss and damage, definitely. That was something that came up in COP26 in Glasgow. There's different ways that we can support those other countries. The first is reduce our own CO2 emissions, meet the targets we've got, build the infrastructure, build our economy, build our housing so that, and our transport, and use our land so that it reduces climate emissions. But the second thing is support those countries now, because if you look at places like Pakistan, we've got a cross-party group in Pakistan. They had horrendous floods last year, but they're not getting the support to build resilience for the future, for the local companies, the local food production, to support people in villages. They're not getting the adaptation investment, and they're not getting the resilience investment. So we can learn from those countries that are suffering now. And countries like Malawi, you know, they should be able to use solar to power their hospitals. I've seen that work, but it needs support from us. So we've got to be quite targeted. I'm also a recycling spokesperson. Finally, Chris, on solar, local grid is critical. We need the infrastructure for the national grid, but I've met companies who are now letting local renewables projects and solar projects link into their grid capacity. We can do this now. We don't need to wait a decade. And finally, in Edinburgh, we've got over 20 schools that have got electricity, solar panels on them. And that's through the local co-op. I now want to see our flats and tenements getting the same opportunity. This is a now issue. We could do it now. We do not need to wait. We need the local government, the Scottish government, and the UK government. If they were all Labour, that would make life so much easier. So let's make sure we actually get the power to deliver this in practice. We can lobby, we can campaign, but we need to actually hold those levers of power to actually make this happen.
Absolutely. Labour in power in Scotland, Labour in power in UK. Ed, how are you going to do it?
Thank you for the great questions. Georgina, very interested in SMRs and Rolls-Royce's SMR work. I think it's got big potential. I'm not a nuclear physicist, I should add, in case you wondered. I did do physics A-level. Anyway, that's another story.
I failed mine.
On your planning point, you see, I think what's so interesting about this is that I think we can do planning reform in a nature positive way, because I actually think the current system is just rubbish. I mean, the current system is badly planned. There genuinely isn't proper planning in this planning system for how do you protect nature and how do you get things built. And I think that is what we've got to do. And let's be honest, the biggest threat to nature and biodiversity is not tackling the climate crisis. So it's a really important point, but I think we can do it. I'm a big fan of Chris, your work and on solar. And I think there's a sort of basic point here, which is you know, we have these huge natural resources which we are just not using as a country. Sun, wind, tidal power, all of that. You know, think of that potential. In a way, they sort of got this, you know, 100, 200 years ago, and we just need to kind of rediscover the potential here. And that actually takes me to the answer to Natalie's question. There's lots of things to say about this, Natalie, and it's a really important question. But one thing we can do is that one of the most striking facts about what has changed compared to when I was Energy Secretary 15 years ago is that today, for 90% of the world, new renewables are cheaper than new fossil fuels. But, and there's a very big but here, only if there is access to capital in developing countries at a reasonable rate. And that's why multilateral development bank reform, MDB reform, is such an important lever here. It doesn't answer everything, but if we are going to persuade the developing world to take this leap, we've got to give them access to the finance and the capital, in particular through the World Bank and the IMF, which is going to make that possible, and we can. And that's kind of the point I want to sort of end on, really, because I think there's one really important thing I want to say to this audience, is I think we have a job to do to explain to people the real economics of clean power. Because I think that in lots of people's minds, and this is what Sunak is trying to play on, green is more expensive. Actually, it's not. If you look at energy, green is cheaper. You know, last summer, renewables were 9 times cheaper than fossil fuels. And the economics is on our side here. And, you know, I think saying to people, look, this is now not just the right economic choice for the long term. This is the right economic choice for now. This is the way to cut your bills, give you energy security, and save the planet for future generations. And I think we should feel incredibly confident about going out and taking that message around the country. Thank you.
Okay, colleagues. You heard there about taking that message, taking it out around the country. That the power is in this room. Our power is there to talk to people, to make them understand the reality that the culture war is a war on our children's future and all of our communities. And very much, I hope you will feel able to join SERA today and be part of working with us on that. And follow us on Twitter, because we're trying to get to 6,000 followers today. Finally, if you want to carry on this conversation, we have a session tomorrow with Prospect Union at 12:30, very much on the just transition and jobs and training. And we have a session on Tuesday with the Energy Research Accelerator and University of Birmingham on about public sector investment and involvement within this whole area. So I hope if you want to carry on the debate, if you didn't have a chance for your question today, come back and see us tomorrow or Tuesday and we'll carry on the conversation. Thanks for your time.
Oh, yeah.